This doll doesn't write letters. It writes warnings in your blood. You don't see a hand move. You don't hear a pen scratch. And yet the sentence arrives wet and certain, spelling out what you swore no one would ever know. It has passed from shelf to shelf, from velvet-lined cases to kitchen counters, and every new home made the same promise. This time will be different. But the doll isn't interested in different. It understands appetite better than any appraiser. It feels the tremor in a pulse when rarity meets need. Collectors tell themselves the past can be owned. This object corrects them. Notes bloom like bruises on linen tile archival paper. There's no wound to dress, only the slow ache where resolve used to be. Tonight, the crate opens again. Another bargain without witnesses. Another story that begins with discovery and ends with a stain you can't wash out of your name. Collectors pretend the hunt ends with a receipt, but every invoice is only a prologue. The thing you bring home brings its world with it, the air of its last room, the dust of its last breath, the vow someone whispered and failed to keep. In the quiet after rain, unboxing becomes liturgy. You center the artifact, lay out tools, promise neutrality, only to feel a tug, not on your sleeve, but on intention itself. Objects that survive a century do so by learning people. They memorize which words make us open our hands and which make us hold fast. And this one has learned a script more persuasive than any provenance. The first night is always the softest. You tell yourself you're only observing. You film, you measure, you document. You do not admit that you're waiting for a sign. The sign arrives without spectacle, refusing you the comfort of a culprit. Letters lift out of nothing, wet as bitten lips, spelling a command that sounds like a memory. Rational minds prefer causes with fingerprints. They want compromised vents, prankish leaks, capillaries too polite to scream. They want to find a pinhole in the world and plug it with tape. When the second note arrives, it chooses a surface no leak could bless, a slate coaster, bone dry, smelling faintly of citrus and salt. The message is shorter than a threat and heavier than a plea. You check your skin, palms first, then forearms, then the mirror, expecting a nick to volunteer guilt. Nothing. The body is intact. The life is not. Because the words are not asking you to bleed. They're telling you what you've already sacrificed when you were too busy pretending to be careful. You wipe the coaster clean. The phrase returns, letter by letter, as though the stone remembers better than you do. A line that isn't for the camera or the lab or any future reader. It's for you from you, as if the doll had slipped you a pen while you slept. You can inventory the past like a crime scene, but the evidence refuses to stay dead. Records whisper recurring names, dealers with short careers and long silences, estates settled with clauses that read like apologies. Each owner thought possession meant power until the object began to speak, and then language stole that illusion. The notes varied, confessions, ultimatums, instructions, but the aftermath converged: sales at losses, gifts that felt like escapes, burnings that failed to take. In online forums, the doll appears as a rumor that behaves like documentation, blurry photos to explain. Thread by thread, a pattern tightens around. One claim: the doll does not curse. It insists. It insists on saying the thing you will do and the thing you will lose, and it is never wrong, only early. You tell yourself history is context. The doll prefers consequence. Warnings are generous only at the beginning. The third night narrows the tolerance, and the notes stop describing and start dictating. It's easy to mistake that shift for malice. It might be mercy. A command spares you the theater of indecision. Do this, say that, go now. But compliance is not safety. It is only instruction, and instructions can lead you into rooms you'd meant never to enter again. You realize the doll doesn't need a pen because it has you. Your veins are simply reservoirs the message borrows and returns. leaving you lightheaded with a truth you thought was private property. When you finally speak the first truth aloud, the room brightens a degree, as though electricity prefers honesty. Then the light gutters, reminding you that every confession is also an opening. What comes through depends on what you just invited. Patterns don't reveal themselves. They corner you. The first owner called it a parlor trick, until the notes arrived on linen he kept for holidays. Another swore alcohol was the solvent for anything, even guilt. The script bled brighter through the wipe. Testimonies arrive in contradicting tones: boast, denial, apology. But the sentences match as if copied from a master page. Each account begins with novelty and moves to negotiation: hide the doll, lock the room, sleep elsewhere, sell fast. Then the language sharpens. The object stops documenting and starts forecasting. Appointments missed, shipments delayed, names that should not be said out loud. What frightens them isn't the blood, it's the accuracy. Even regret, it turns out, has a handwriting sample. We collect their stories the way they collected the doll greedily, telling ourselves information is a cure. But we're not building a cure. We're building a mirror big enough to fit the word again. Archives are temples where belief files its nails. We feed reels and folders to the light, and the light feeds us names: the seamstress in the drowned quarter, the auction held on a day the river rose, the estate inventory that listed toys alongside funerary cards. The receipts do not confess, but they leave a trail of silence. Notes appended after sales, sudden changes of address, donors insisting on anonymity. A photograph emerges of a workshop window with lace pinned to dry beside black thread, and the caption supplies a surname that tastes like a door key. The doll's origin isn't a legend writ backward. It's a grievance stitched forward, patient as hand sewing. We map the owners like a constellation that refuses to complete an animal, and instead outlines a wound. Somewhere inside the paperwork, a sentence we haven't seen yet is waiting to be written, and it will use whichever hand happens to be holding the file. In the lab, language is weighed like ash. We stage the doll under acrylic, seal the room from drafts, calibrate cameras to see what we've already decided cannot be there. Controls comfort the uneasy. They also humiliate them. On inert substrates, the lines still appear, unmarred by brushstroke or pen pressure, a wetness that refuses to be reagent. The blood is a thesis our tools cannot pass. It belongs to the owner by every metric except puncture. We try heat, we try cold. We isolate the doll and the page, then isolate the owner and the page, then isolate our certainty, and watch it fail alone. When the script arrives this time, it adopts the tone of a lab report: concise, impersonal, brutal. It does not accuse, it labels. The label matches a box the subject forgot they were carrying. Outside the clean light, someone puts a hand on a table to steady themselves, and the room tilts, obedient to a word only they can hear. Markets teach us to rename hunger as expertise. Provenance becomes parable. Margins become absolution. The auctioneer tells us every object wants to be seen, and we nod, forgetting that attention is a blade with two edges. We trace sale ledgers that look less like history and more like a centrifuge, spinning the doll outward to anyone willing to believe their story is stronger than its sentence. In private, some sellers confess to weird fortune, debts resolved, rivals discredited, arriving the same week as the first read word. The price of keeping the doll is never payment, it's audience. You will watch it write, you will watch yourself read, and then you will perform the reading for others. That performance is profit until it isn't. When the bids climb, so does the risk. The object refuses to live as trophy and the room learns it. A hand rises. Another hand. The doll doesn't care which wins. It is only choosing the next stage. Night work strips bravado down to breath. We move our lights through corridors that once held parties and now hold echoes. The doll prefers the hour when even power lines sound lonely. In infrared, the room writes its own weather. Heat pooling at thresholds, cold settled like dust on frames. We place the doll where drafts die and wait, pretending patience is neutrality. The recorder's meter skips when no mouth speaks, and a rustle answers a question we did not voice. The note appears not on the page prepared, but on the wall we ignored, letters rising from plaster like a bruise surfacing. It says where to go next, a location we hoped wasn't real. The map on the table offers distances and lies about time. We pack our gear in the order of courage we have left. Outside, the rain resumes, careful as a witness. Inside, the doll falls silent, the way a guide does after pointing once. Prediction is kinder than surprise only until it's correct. The room has been proofed like a confession booth, gaps taped, vents sealed, paper weighed and measured. Still, a sentence arrives before anyone speaks, laid out in strokes that know where the line break will fall. Locks click in filmed silence. Alarms sit primed as if faith could be calibrated. What comes now is not a record of what was done, but what will be done. And the phrasing has the cold politeness of a calendar invite. It names a door that hasn't opened in a time that hasn't struck. It suggests witnesses that do not yet know they are implicated. The temptation is to refuse the future by refusing to read, but language has already lodged itself where the eyes cannot close. The object does not argue, it schedules. And the air, once neutral, grows anticipatory, like a stage before the curtain lifts, dust suspended, lights warm, and an audience made of dread. The corridor is a throat that remembers every word ever swallowed. Structural silence feels engineered, the kind that absorbs footfalls and promises privacy. Yet the walls carry a low, metallic patience. When a latch yields without touch, it is not a startle. It is an acceptance, a line arriving at the space left for it. Lists of control measures collapse into short sentences. Door sealed, seal failed. Guard posted, gaze diverted. The prediction clicks into place like a key already turned. The odd mercy is that nothing lunges. Instead, the world rearranges its hinges. Fibers on the prepared page drink air that should be elsewhere. The note on the plaster completes itself in a hand no one will admit to knowing. And the room behaves like it has rehearsed this moment for decades. The threshold becomes a thesis. Whatever is kept out will come in when it is named, and it has been named precisely. Evidence prefers the language of numbers, but not tonight. Temperature maps show patternless heat. Microphones pick up a frequency unruly as breath. The page we meant to sacrifice remains insultingly clean, while the ceiling chooses to speak instead. Syllables pulled through hairline cracks in plaster. The message is curt, an imperative stripped of politeness. A single verb addressing no one and everyone. Tools become spectators. The recorder's levels rise like a blush. A lens fogs in a room colder than a morgue drawer. There is a taste of iron at the back of every mouth, though no tongue has been bitten. The realization lands with the weight of a verdict. Control was never the test, only the pretext. The object writes not where invited, but where ignored, selecting surfaces that make denial impossible. Somewhere, a heart rate quickens, paired to letters forming on paint. The sentence completes, and the floor decides to tilt. Confession arranges the body before the mind can agree. The command lands like a hand between shoulder blades and the knees. Understand first. A person can tell themselves they are complying to gather data, that posture is just another instrument, but the floorboards take the truth and broadcast it through their grain. The doll's gaze, kiln-fired and unblinking, feels angled, though nothing mechanical has moved. The message on the wall, once imperative, now reads like an address. Words enact choreography. They fold spines and lift chins. They position breath over silence until the two become a single act. The camera does not judge. It chronicles how an instruction is also a key, how the lock is not metal but the reflex to obey. Somewhere in the rafters, wind presses the roof into a long, reluctant exhale, and the house answers like a throat clearing, before a final line. Accuracy becomes cruelty when it forecloses choice. The predicted hour has passed and the door did what it was told. Now, the language turns domestic, selecting objects with private histories, a tea towel, a shopping list, the back of an old photograph. Each line anticipates an action not yet taken, and the cost of taking it. The house begins to feel inhabited by a grammar older than architecture, a syntax that inflects light and tilts stairs. Somewhere in the stack of documents, an origin waits, but the object is tired of backstory. It wants performance. It knows that telling the future is not a gift, but leverage. The crew pretends to debate next steps while packing in haste, and the exit route reroutes itself like a living thing. On the way out, another note appears in a place no one can leave behind. It is brief, indecently intimate, and exactly right. The story doesn't crack open with a scream, it unthreads. In the reels and probate files, a seamstress appears not as a ghost, but as a ledger entry with a margin stain that never dried. She lived above floodlines and below forgiveness, stitching commissions no one asked about. Until a child vanished and language failed its purpose. Grief misuses tools. It turns thimbles into reliquaries and toys into instruments, and somewhere in that winter, the stitches migrated from cloth to consequence. Notes surface. A return parcel. A letter marked undeliverable. A pattern book, annotated like a prayer. The object we pray at is not hungry for blood. It hungers for completion. It makes sentences out of what the living refuse to say and leases our bodies as envelopes. What people call a curse looks, under archival light, like workmanship, a device engineered to force delivery after the post has closed. Not malice. Postage should do worked. Nanti names do a the workhouse I'd scap to nay. The room of making has not moved, only dulled. Boards remember weight where the stool once sat. A window keeps the color of a particular afternoon like a bruise that won't heal. Threads in old jars fade at different rates, a timeline in miniature. Here the idea took on weight. If words cannot reach the living, send them to the stubborn, to those who hoard, to the ones who will not let go. A doll is a courier with a face, an argument you cannot ignore. The recipe hides in ordinary gestures, linen steeped in tannins, iron filings, and inkstone. A lock of hair braided into padding. The miracle isn't supernatural. It's insistence engineered through patience and grief. A message machine requiring only proximity and refusal. Stand near, say nothing, and the mechanism engages. You are not punished. You are conscripted into delivery. In this room, the first sentence must have arrived in air darker than the window allowed. The pattern resolves not as a haunting, but as a system. A hand-built apparatus that recruits other hands, routing meaning through blood, the way batteries route current. The object does not open wounds. It opens confessions, and the body pays the postage in a fluid that can't be counterfeited. Each owner complains of exposure yet participates, filming, preserving, selling. Every act a form of forwarding. The mechanism is simple. Place the courier where denial is strongest. Wait and watch the red line bridge gap to gap. The message arrives on whatever carries the most context. A grocery list, a family photo, a legal form, because delivery is not ink. It is impact. Under lenses and controls, the doll behaves like honest machinery, indifferent and exact. Call it magic, and you miss the intention. Call it grief, and you begin to hear the motor and insistence that refuses termination of service. Revelation costs what concealment promised to protect. The machine wants a single thing: completion of a sentence that living mouths dodged. It points not to miracles, but to phone calls unanswered, to visits postponed, to rooms left unentered because apology feels like a small death. A new line appears that names no sin, only a direction. It is almost gentle. It is almost gentle. Deliver this. Say that. Go now. The temptation is to frame obedience as superstition. Yet, the body warms at the thought of finishing, What grief began? The house seems to ease its breath when the idea is said aloud. Return what was built to the address where addresses fail. A place where paper dissolves and only speech survives. The courier sits and waits because that is its design, and the living hesitate because that is theirs. The choice is an old one. Carry message or become it. Some returns aren't to owners but to origins, to addresses the map writes in water. There is a shoreline where parcels fail and prayers keep their stamps. The plan looks like superstition on paper. Carry the courier to the last known edge. Speak the unfinished sentences aloud, and let the tide file what language cannot. It is not an exorcism. It is a delivery in the only direction left. The walk from car to surf feels ceremonial because the body knows when it is carrying more than weight. The air thins to salt and static. The world pairs itself to two elements, voice and listening. Everyone rehearses the lines they owe, and the ones they fear will answer back. The object, exact as ever, sits patient. It has never promised mercy, only an end to silence, and even that might be enough. The shore receives the courier and refuses the message, the way a locked door accepts your knock and keeps its lock. We stage the return like penance lantern in the lee of a driftwood rib, recorders set to drink wind, the ledger bared like a throat. The tide lifts the doll's shoes and withdraws, and the note arrives, not on paper, not on the ledger, but on the inside of the waterproof case, red as a bruise blooming behind plastic. Say it. The instruction is a loop disguised as mercy. If you speak, it asks again. If you stay silent, it writes louder. The ocean is a choir of doors that never open. Ashira's voice drops to the careful pitch of rescue, while mine rises to the register of pretense, claiming we're testing, gathering, observing. We aren't. We're negotiating with a machine, built to exhaust negotiations. I say a first sentence I've owed for years. The surge answers with a colder gust. The doll does not move, but the world tilts to balance around what it has heard. Back inside, the air tastes like metal filings. The doll takes the room, and then the rooms beyond, occupying surfaces like a landlord arriving with keys. I try to starve it of context. No paper, no cloth, nothing absorbent, but language knows how to make a page out of anything. In the bathroom mirror, letters bloom backward, teaching my face to read itself. I resolve to hide the doll and then conceal the hiding, and then hide the concealment. The loop tightens until the only thing left to disguise is breath. The crew becomes audience, and audience becomes accomplice. They watch me not watching. They document my refusal with the tenderness of paramedics. The sentence in the mirror is not accusation, only address, and its accuracy collapses the difference. If the doll wants delivery, it has learned the fastest route. Shame does not need a stamp. Every denial is another envelope. We try to outsource consequence the way collectors outsource guilt. Sell the story back to the man who sold the object. Tobias receives us with velvet jokes and ledgered charm, the confidence of someone who believes history is inventory. The doll answers his patter with punctuation, a wet comma on his cuff, a period on his lot book, an M dash across his practiced smile. He laughs until he looks down. The note scrawls along the edge of a packing slip in handwriting. I can't disown, not for sale. Witnesses change the chemistry. The room thickens with the knowledge that we can all see the same sentence and still pretend differently. Tobias's ringed hand hovers over the doll as if it could be palmed like a coin. He withdraws before contact, chastened by a grammar older than commerce. The loop tightens refuse. Return, repeat. The object won't be traded. It demands to be carried. Phone calls to the living are harder than prayers for the dead. I dial and hang up, dial and hold, dialing as if repetition could abrade the future into something blunter. The doll keeps time with new imperatives, each softer than the last, which is somehow worse. Marta arrives with a calm built in labs, Rowan with a vocabulary grown in crypts. They occupy chairs, like witnesses prepared to swear. I read the line on the page, And then the line reads me back. The voice on the phone says my name the way it did before I learned to curate. And a silence follows big enough to fit what I should have said years ago. The doll writes one word, then none. Delivery feels less like exorcism than like honest postage finally paid. The loop doesn't release. It changes tempo. Denial slows. Reveal accelerates. Regret stays steady, evergreen. By dawn, the loop has worn a groove. The doll writes less text and more timing, as if the sentence now lives in when, not what. Doors unlatch before hands arrive. Lights dim, a breath ahead of thought, coaxing us toward a destination we keep postponing. The decision to go back to the lab feels like surrender to procedure. And yet procedure might be the only prayer we can afford. We pack with the delicacy of smugglers and the speed of the guilty. The last message appears where a benediction would above the threshold, small and surgical, cut power. It reads like both command and promise, and I don't know which is worse. We step into rain that has learned our names. The van coughs awake. Inside the case, the doll sits as if built to ride. Perhaps it was. The world narrows to fluorescent corridors and the hope that architecture can argue with grief. The lab surrenders its civility when the breakers fall. Fluorescents die like a choir cut mid-hymn, and the room's heartbeat becomes the tick of cooling metal. We planned this as a last experiment. Starve the courier of electricity, peel away interference, force the phenomenon to choose between theater and law. Darkness does not blunt the effect, it clarifies it. In the hush, the acrylic cube fogs from the inside as if something has begun to breathe that never needed breath before. The first sentence writes itself on the underside of the lid, mirror backward, obliging us to bend, to read, to admit. It doesn't accuse. It instructs hold fast. The words mean touch and endure in the same breath. Everyone pretends they don't know which meaning applies to them. Instruments blink their last, timers stall, and our justifications gutter with the lights. The doll waits like machinery between cycles. We are the variable. That was always the design. We attempt neutrality the way drowning people attempt stillness. Ear sees what pride refuses heat, blooming from palms that swear they never touched, breath condensing where denial said there was none. Marta narrates controls in a voice designed to make panic feel unprofessional. Rowan murmurs citations like spells that bind nothing but air. The second instruction arrives without ceremony on a substrate purposely absurd, aluminum foil stretched over a clip frame to reject absorption. The foil accepts the line anyway, the way a shoreline accepts a message bottle when it should refuse. Say her name. The mandate is not to conjure, but to complete, to admit the addressee that made the mechanism necessary. We list candidates like absolutions, but the doll tolerates no catalogs. Somewhere between courage and compliance, the room shortens, as though distance is a superstition language can cure. Names have edges sharper than instruments. Adelaide Morrow is easy to pronounce and hard to survive. The syllables carry weather, law, and a stitch of winter lint. When Rowan says the name aloud, the temperature drops with measurable pettiness, as if the room resents us for finally reading what it mailed months ago. The foil buckles microscopically, and the cube's fog clears to reveal a fresh line, written where we cannot pretend mischief inside the doll's left glass eye. A crimson filament curls like a thread passing through iris to pupil. Type, the earlier note said. Tonight, the letter is a proof. Blood mirrored back in a lens that never blinks. Marta whispers the clinical term for the way fluids can map identity. I hear only the older meaning, kid. The courier has always selected the path of least refusal. Tonight that path passes not through paper, but through seeing. Instruction becomes sentence when the next line writes where leaving is required on the lab's steel door. Letters bead in tidy arterial points as if the metal sweats admission. Take her home. We argue meanings because argument delays obedience. Home could be address, origin, mouth. Rowan's scholarship leans toward shorelines. Marta's method points to provenance. A shear watches me, having already translated. The machine was never interested in architecture. It wants root and receiver. All couriers end at a voice. The cube fogs once more and clears to a final precursor now. Time abandons its usual politeness. In the silence that follows, the building's emergency lights blink and die, as if the lab itself has recused its authority. I unlatch the cube. Every plan we made goes brittle at the edges and flakes away. Delivery is not relocation. It's speaking with nothing held back. The last test isn't a test. We circle the table and give the room the only power we have left, our breath. I lift the doll, and the lab's chill folds around my wrists, like manacles cold enough to be instructions. The final delivery is a voice printed into air. I say the name we all owe Adelaide. Then the address the parcel never found. I am sorry. Then the truth that birthed the machine. I kept what wasn't mine. The cube's walls weep, a thin condensation that tastes like iron. The table receives a single period of red that does not spread. No instruments fail because we have stopped asking them to carry the weight. The doll does not move. It quiets. Not silence, completion. The line on the steel door dries into a brown ordinary. Outside, the storm sounds like exhalation after held breath. We haven't broken a curse. We have finally delivered a letter that refused to be undelivered. Completion is quieter than we rehearsed. No triumphant rupture in the air, no saintly glow, only the dignity of something finished. The lab smells like cooled metal and breath, the way stations do after the last train leaves. We test the room out of habit and find nothing to measure but normalcy, the humiliating miracle of ordinary time. The cube sits open, the doll at rest, as if rest had always been its truest pose. A thought passes through the group without a speaker. We have been couriers, not detectives. The urge to archive the moment claws at us, but documentation would cheapen delivery, turning what was intimate into evidence. There remains the matter of where the courier lives when the route is over. The file suggested a place designed for endings without arrivals. A room that keeps language from pretending it succeeded. We gather the case without ceremony. When lights return, they feel earned, like a taste after fasting. There is a municipal room built for failure, and it has the politeness of a mausoleum. Dead letters live here. Misaddressed apologies and returns resigned to the gray patience of shelves. The clerk's key turns with a reverence reserved for bureaucracies that secretly guard grace. We sign no forms we can keep. Entry itself is a confidentiality. The air bears the tannic sweetness of paper that never learned its recipient. We do not speak intent aloud. To name it would be to perform it, and delivery abhors theater. The case opens like a reliquary, and the doll regards the room with the calm of an instrument back in its drawer. We place the ledger, the label, the portrait, each artifact like a syllable returning to its alphabet. The place accepts the weight without protest, not burial. Storage the way tides store salt, dispersed and everywhere. The room accepts what we bring because it was built for acceptance. We do not seal the doll away like contraband. We introduce it like a citizen with papers finally in order. A last temptation whispers that we should whisper back. One more test, one more plea for spectacle. But the mechanism taught us its ethic insistence without drama. We leave the courier with its kin letters that failed not from malice, but from the ordinary tragedies of timing and address. On the way out, the corridor sounds different, less like a throat, and more like breath. I half expect to see a red line appear on the concrete, naming a next step. But language, like tide, withdraws when it has delivered. Outside, the sky has forgotten its storm. We carry our emptier hands with a care usually reserved for fragile things. Perhaps regret is lighter when it finally fits into an envelope. Days shrink back into the size of a day when dread no longer stretches them. The apartment remembers how to be an apartment. Taps hiss. Traffic speaks in vowels. Plants attempt faith. I call a number I owes and speak without choreography. grateful for the lack of poetry on the other end. No instrument spikes, no tied answers, no script appears in wet insistence. The message lives where it should, held by a living ear. Grief remains. Machines do not delete it. But it is legible now, its edges softened by the fact of receipt. I keep the notebook that once displayed commands, and its pages behave. When sleep arrives, it does not bargain. The work becomes the part after the film, continuing without a courier. Somewhere in the city, a vault anchors a quiet. Somewhere on a shore, the wind reads no one's name and still sounds kind. Endings are letters that arrive without stamps. A week later, we return to sign the log and confirm custody we no longer desire. The vault breathes the same amber patience, but the clerk points to a shelf with a puzzled kindness. On the corner of a parcel once addressed to a name we have spent months pronouncing, a single word has dried into the unremarkable brown of time received. No wetness, no drama, not even proof worth a camera. Only the ordinary finality of mail completing its route. The doll sits nearby, porcelain unglossed by new light, a tool at peace. We stand without speaking because language feels redundant. When we leave, the corridor's hum sounds like a signature drawn straight. If the doll writes again, it won't be for us. Some stories end not with silence, but with the absence of need to speak. In that absence, regret loosens and other sentences can begin.